think it's becoming easier for networks to do shows like House and Lie to Me for Fox that don't necessarily need to be watched every single week, like a show like 24. You know, if you miss it, that's the end. A show like Lost, you know, or you have to catch up online somehow. Do you think it's just easier for networks to put on shows that are just self-contained? You can miss 4 or 5 weeks and come back.
It's funny because for the longest time, the rule of thumb in network programming, and we're talking about from the beginning of television in the late 40s up until about 1980 or so. The rule of thumb is that people cannot remember what happened from episode to episode. Soap operas during the day, which are daily, you can do these ongoing things, but don't do it during prime time on weekly series. And with a couple of exceptions, a show called Peyton Place in the 60s and a couple of others, you look at TV and at the end of each episode, it was like you pushed a collective erase button and there was no memory from one episode to the other, which is one of the reasons television until 1980 could be no more sophisticated than it is. It would be like at the end of every chapter, an author had to pretend that nobody had read the first one. You had to start all over again. There's only so much you could do. You couldn't develop the long kinds of stories. It wasn't until Dallas became a huge hit in the late 70s that the network executives thought, oh, people will watch from episode to episode. And some of the biggest hits in hour-long drama after that were these serialized kinds of things. Now, we're coming back to that other sort of theory is that the safest thing is something people can watch that's self-contained. And the executives are looking at the biggest hits. CSIs, self-contained. Law and Orders, self-contained. House, self-contained. The Mentalists, all of these procedural kinds of things. And in many ways, the great revolution that starts in the late 70s and 80s of finally giving TV a memory and letting TV do the kind of thing it's better at than any other medium is now in many ways being taken away because it's safer for them to put on a house. They're also easier to run in syndication. Doesn't matter when you pop into them, you don't have to be... and the problem with serialization is when it hits and becomes a big hit, like Desperate Housewives was in its first season, then there's nothing like it. But if it doesn't, you're dead. Because if you haven't been watching Lost all along and you happen to stumble onto an episode of Lost, you are not going to have you're not going to have the slightest idea what's happening if you have been watching it all along, much less if you haven't. The same was true of a really great comedy called Arrested Development. Wonderful show, but it was really intimidating to people who didn't watch it regularly. If you happened to pop in that in episode 13, you didn't know what was going on, and likely you would never come back again. So it's safer to do those self-contained, but it's also more limiting. You know, House is a fine show, but it's House. It's the same thing all the time. What character development happens there is done on a very kind of formulaic sort of way. And you compare what can go on in a show, even like Law and Order. That's a better comparison because really good acting and fine writing and all that. Because Law and Order has to push the reset button, compare what Law and Order can do to what The Wire can do, or Homicide, or one of those serialized shows. The level of sophistication is just so much greater, but it is more dangerous. So I think that's one of the reasons networks have been leaning on those others. Plus the fact that they're the first law of entertainment dynamics. They're imitating what's working. And when they see something like CSI work, which you can just churn out like Chevys, I mean, that's assembly line entertainment, and get in the top 5 every single week. Who needs the aggravation of Heroes when you can keep churning that stuff out and get bigger numbers?